had been in Portugal for 11 months when my neighbor Delia sent me a text that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening, 7 hours ahead of home, and I was sitting on my apartment balcony in Lisbon with a glass of wine and a work report I had been trying to finish for an hour. My phone lit up on the table beside me and I picked it up without urgency, expecting nothing in particular. The message said, "Natalia, I don't want to be in anyone's business, but I think you should know. Your sister has been living in your house for months. There's a man here too. They repainted the front door." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the table and looked out at the city for a while, at the terracotta rooftops and the orange wash of the evening light, and I breathed carefully the way I had learned to breathe when something hit me in a place I had not been protecting. My house. The house I had spent 4 years saving for, 2 years renovating by myself, and which I had left in the care of my sister Renata with one instruction: check on it once a week, collect the mail, water the plants near the back window. I had not asked her to stay there. I had not offered it to her. I had given her a spare key for emergencies and trusted her the way you trust a sister, completely and without documentation, which is to say, in exactly the way that leaves you no protection at all. I set down my wine. I opened my laptop. I looked up the earliest available flight home, and I found one leaving in 31 hours. I booked it before I let myself feel anything. Follow my story till the end, like, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from, so that I can see how far my story has gone. My name is Natalia Reeves. I am 34 years old. I am a senior architect at an international design firm, which is how I ended up in Lisbon, contracted for an 11-month project overseeing the renovation of a historic waterfront building that my firm had been commissioned to restore. It was the biggest project of my career, the kind of assignment that you work toward for a decade and then hold very carefully when it finally arrives. I had taken it knowing the timing was difficult. My house had only been mine for 2 years. My savings had recovered but not fully. And leaving meant trusting other people with a life I had built carefully and mostly alone. My sister Renata was 30 years old and had been, for most of those 30 years, the person in the family who was looked after rather than the one doing the looking after. She was charming in the way of people who have always been charming, and have therefore never needed to develop anything underneath it. She could talk anyone into anything, stay in any room past her welcome, and make each overstay feel, somehow, like a favor she was doing you. My mother had always called this personality. I had a different name for it that I kept to myself. When I told Renata I was going to Portugal, she cried and said she would miss me and asked if there was anything she could do. I said yes, check the house once a week, collect the mail, water the plants. She said of course. She hugged me at the airport. She waved from the other side of the security barrier until I could not see her anymore. I had thought, watching her wave, that I was lucky to have a sister like that. I had been thinking about that moment a lot since Delia's text arrived. I did not call Renata that night. I thought about it for a long time, sitting on the balcony after I had booked the flight, turning my phone over in my hands. I could have called. I could have said, "I know what you've done, I'm coming home, explain yourself." But I had learned something in 11 months of project management, the difference between the information you have and the information you reveal. Renata did not know that Delia had contacted me. Renata did not know that I was coming home 31 days before my scheduled return date. If I called her now, she would have time to prepare, to move things out, to clean up, to construct whatever story she had been rehearsing in the back of her mind for months. She was good with stories. She always had been. She had grown up in the same family I had, which meant she had watched the same people manage conflict by reframing it until the person with the legitimate grievance started to feel like the difficult one. I was not going to give her that runway. Instead, I opened the group chat I shared with our mother and 2 aunts and checked the last few messages. Nothing unusual, a birthday reminder, a photograph of a cousin's new baby, a recipe someone had shared. Renata had been in the chat regularly. She had not mentioned living in my house. Of course she hadn't. I closed the chat, closed my laptop, went inside and packed my bags in the careful, systematic way I packed everything, starting with what was most essential and working outward, leaving nothing behind that I would need and taking nothing that would slow me down. I had 12 hours before the flight and I intended to use every one of them. I landed at home on a Thursday afternoon. I had arranged for a car from the airport rather than asking anyone to collect me. I had not told my mother I was coming back early. I had not told our aunts. I had told only my closest friend Priya, who lived 2 streets from my house and who had been sending me worried messages since Delia's first text. Messages I had asked her to keep between us. Priya had done some quiet observing of her own. She texted me on the plane between connections with a short update. The front door was indeed a different color, a dark green, not the original cream I had chosen, and there appeared to be a second car in my driveway most evenings. She said lights were on in the house regularly, and that she had seen Renata coming and going with grocery bags as though she owned the place. Which, to be clear, she did not. I read Priya's messages and saved each one, and felt something I had been carefully managed across 11 months of distance begin to sharpen into something more specific. I was not angry in an explosive way. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was more like a door opening inward. A long, slow inward swing that revealed, as it moved, the full size of what was on the other side. I had known Renata my whole life. I had forgiven her small things and larger things. I had told myself each time that she was still growing, still finding herself, still working through something unnamed that made her behave in ways that looked like selfishness but were probably just uncertainty. I was done with that story. The car pulled off the highway and I watched my city come back into view. My house is at the end of a quiet street with oak trees on both sides that turn gold in autumn and drop their leaves slowly all through November. I had bought it in the winter, which meant I had seen it at its plainest, and I had loved it anyway. The wide front porch, the high ceilings inside, the kitchen with the original wooden floors that I had sanded and refinished myself over 3 weekends the summer I moved in. I had chosen the cream front door because it looked warm against the stone exterior, and because it was mine and I could choose. Pulling up in the car, I saw the green door before I saw anything else. It was a dark, heavy green, the kind of color that someone thinks of as sophisticated, and it was wrong on that house in a way that I felt in my chest. There were 2 cars in the driveway. One was Renata's old silver hatchback. The other was a blue SUV I did not recognize. My living room curtains were open and I could see a light on inside and the shape of furniture that was not positioned the way I had left it. I asked the driver to stop a little before the driveway. I sat in the car for 60 seconds and looked at my house and breathed. Then I paid the driver, took my bags, walked up the front path and put my key in the lock. The green door swung open and the smell hit me first. Cooking and something floral and the low undertone of a life lived in a space that was not supposed to be lived in. I stepped inside and stood in my own hallway with my bags at my feet and listened. There were voices in the kitchen. I walked to the kitchen doorway and stood there. Renata was at the stove. A man I had never seen before was sitting at my kitchen table with a coffee mug in front of him, reading something on a tablet. My kitchen table, the oak one I had found at an estate sale and refinished over 2 Sunday afternoons, the one I had been so pleased with that I had sent my mother a photograph of it. They had not heard me come in. For a moment, just a moment, I watched them. The man was perhaps 35, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and the settled posture of someone who had been sitting at that table long enough to be entirely comfortable. There was a jacket hanging on the back of my chair. My chair. The one at the head of the table that I had always kept as mine because the light from the window fell across it exactly right in the mornings. Renata was stirring something. She was wearing a shirt I did not recognize and she had rearranged the items on the counter. My coffee machine had been moved to the far end, and in its place was a larger model I had never seen, plugged into my outlet, sitting in my kitchen as though it had always been there. I said her name. Just her name, Renata. And the sound of my voice in that room had the immediate effect of dropping the temperature in the kitchen by about 10 degrees. She spun around. The color drained from her face in a way I had genuinely never seen happen to a person before. The man at the table looked up. There was a long silence. And then Renata said, with the specific tone of someone trying to find the right word very quickly, "Natalia, you're home." The man's name was Colin. He told me this himself, standing up from my kitchen table and extending his hand with the careful courtesy of someone who understood immediately that the situation was extremely bad and was hoping politeness might buffer some of the damage. I shook his hand because I was raised to shake hands and because I wanted him to know that I was not the problem in this room. I said it was nice to meet him. He said it was nice to meet me too. We both knew this was not true. Renata had not moved from beside the stove. She had one hand still on the counter and she was watching me with the expression I had seen on her face since childhood. The expression that said she was calculating her way through something. Testing possible responses the way you test ice before stepping onto it. She started to speak. She said she could explain. She said she had meant to tell me. She said it had started as just a few nights and then, I held up one hand and she stopped. I said I was going to go upstairs, put down my bags, wash my hands and come back. I said we would talk then. I said this in a voice that was completely level, because I had been managing a 17-person international construction team for 11 months and I had learned that the quieter your voice is, the more the room listens. I went upstairs. The guest room was clearly being used as a bedroom. My own bedroom, my room with the window seat I had built and the wardrobe I had painted, had been left alone, which was something. I had said what needed to be said in a way that couldn't be walked back, and I had meant every word of it. When I came back downstairs, Colin had gone. I had heard the front door close while I was upstairs, which told me either Renata had asked him to leave or he had made that decision himself. Either way, it reduced the audience for what was going to be said, which I appreciated. Renata was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in. She had made tea 2 cups, which I noted with a detached recognition of the gesture. Making tea was Renata's version of an outstretched hand. She was good at outstretched hands. I sat down across from her and did not touch the tea. She began talking almost immediately, and I let her go, because I wanted to hear the whole shape of the story she had prepared before I said anything myself. She said she had come to check on the house in February, shortly after I left, and had found a small leak under the kitchen sink. She said she had stayed a few nights to deal with it. She said then Colin had been going through a difficult time. They had been together 3 months, she said, looking at the table when she said it, and she had thought it would only be for a little while. She said she had meant to tell me but didn't know how. She said she knew it was wrong. She said it all in a rush, the sentences running together the way sentences do when they have been held in for a long time and are not so much being expressed as released. I waited until she was completely finished. Then I said, "Is anything broken?" She looked at me. "In the house," I said. "Is anything damaged?" She said no, she had taken care of everything. I said, "Good. Now I want to show you something." I took out my phone and opened the folder I had created the night Delia's message arrived. In it were 12 photographs that Delia had taken from the street over the preceding weeks and sent to me when I asked. There was the green door, photographed the day it changed with a timestamp. There were the 2 cars in the driveway on 6 separate evenings. There were bags being carried inside, furniture by the look of one, a large flat-packed box that appeared to be a shelving unit. There was a photograph of a small vegetable garden that had appeared in my backyard, which I had not planted and had not authorized. I laid the phone on the table so Renata could see. She looked at the photographs one by one with the expression of someone watching something they knew was coming, but had hoped wouldn't arrive quite so directly. When she had looked at all 12, I put the phone back in my pocket and said, "This isn't a few nights." She said no. She said she was sorry. She said it quietly and I believed she meant it, not as an accounting for what she had done, but as an acknowledgement that she had been caught in a way that made further pretending impossible. That was a different thing and I knew the difference. I asked her about the furniture. She said she had brought some pieces from her old flat. I asked where her old flat was. She looked down at the table. She said she had let it go, given notice to the landlord in April. April was 7 months ago. 7 months ago she had made a decision about my house that she had not shared with me at all, while I was abroad and trusting her with a key. I let that sit in the air between us. I asked Renata to walk through the house with me. She did not want to. I asked again calmly and she stood up and we walked from room to room and I made notes on my phone as we went. The living room had been rearranged, my sofa repositioned, my bookshelves reorganized, a large print on one wall that was not mine. The second bedroom had been fully set up as a couple's room, a double bed where my spare single had been, a wardrobe I did not recognize, matching bedside tables with lamps. The bathroom had doubled in contents. The small study where I kept my drafting table and design materials had been moved, my table pushed against the wall, my plan files stacked in a corner, the central space given over to a desk and computer setup that was clearly Colin's workstation. I wrote down every item. I photographed every room. I did not comment as we walked, which I could tell was harder for Renata to manage than if I had been shouting. She kept starting sentences and stopping them. She kept looking at me sideways. I had managed enough difficult conversations to know that silence is the most precise tool in any of them. At the end of the walkthrough, I stood in the hallway and looked at the green front door from the inside and said, "The door will be repainted. The furniture that isn't mine will be removed. The desk in my study will be removed. Everything I have documented here goes back to the condition it was in when I left." I said it the way I would give instructions on a job site, clear, specific, no room for interpretation. Renata said, "Natalia, we need somewhere to go." I looked at her. I said, "I know. Our mother called that evening." I was not surprised. Renata had clearly made a phone call between the walkthrough and dinner, because my mother's voice when I answered had the specific quality of someone who has been given one side of a story and is carrying it with them into the conversation. She said she had spoken to Renata. She said she understood I was upset. She said family had to look after family, and that I needed to understand Renata had been going through a hard time and had needed stability. She said I had a house and Renata had needed somewhere, and surely I could see how, from a certain angle, this was an act of necessity rather than an act of taking. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. And then I said, "She gave notice on her flat in April. She moved a man I have never met into my house. She repainted my front door. She dismantled my study. She did none of this with my knowledge or permission across 7 months, while I was abroad trusting her." There was a pause. My mother said, "She should have told you." I said, "Yes." My mother said, "But you have so much, Natalia." And there it was, the sentence that had followed me my whole life, the one that had always been used to justify whatever Renata took or was given or failed to return. I had a house. Renata had needed somewhere. These two facts were being asked to cancel each other out, and I was being asked to accept the result. I said, "I'll talk to you soon," and ended the call. I sat in my kitchen, with its moved coffee machine and unfamiliar curtains, and I thought about how long I had been accepting that particular arithmetic. I had a conversation with Priya that night over the phone that helped me think more clearly than I had managed on my own since landing. Priya was a solicitor, which was useful, but more than that, she was someone who had known me for 15 years and who had a talent for separating what I was feeling from what I needed to do, which were often different things running at different speeds in different directions. She asked me what outcome I actually wanted. Not what I was angry about, what I wanted. I said I wanted my house back, exactly as it was, and I wanted Renata to understand what she had done in a way that went beyond the surface apology she had offered at the kitchen table. Priya asked if I wanted a legal route or a personal one. I said I hadn't decided. She said that was fine, but I should know that as the legal owner of the property, I had the right to issue a formal notice requiring the occupants to vacate, and that the presence of the man Colin, as an unlicensed occupant who had been there 7 months, created a separate and more complicated issue if I wanted to avoid a prolonged process. She said the simplest path was to give formal written notice to both Renata and Colin with a specific vacate date, documented and delivered properly, so that if they did not comply, the legal position was clear. She said it in the same practical way she said most things, and I wrote down every word. Then I asked how long I had been letting Renata do things like this, not this specifically but versions of this in smaller ways over the years. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "A long time, Nat." I said I knew. The next morning I went to see a solicitor, not Priya, because she had advised me that a friend should not be my legal representative in a dispute involving my immediate family, but a colleague of hers named James Okoro, who was calm and thorough and who had, Priya told me, handled enough family property disputes to be unsurprised by anything. I brought my documentation, the photographs Delia had taken, the timestamps on each one, a written account I had typed up on the plane of everything Renata had told me during our kitchen conversation, and a copy of the original spare key agreement I had typed and sent to Renata by email before I left for Portugal, which specified clearly that the key was for emergency access only and that no occupancy was intended or authorized. I had sent that email because I was an architect and I had spent my career understanding that verbal agreements are not agreements at all. I had sent it casually as a summary of our conversation, but I had sent it and it was in my email archive and it was time-stamped and it said exactly what I had intended. James read everything without rushing. Then he confirmed what Priya had told me. He drafted a formal notice that afternoon, addressed to both Renata and Colin, specifying the property address, the basis for the notice, and a vacate date 28 days out. He advised that 28 days was reasonable and that issuing it formally in writing served as the foundation for any further action if needed. I asked what further action might look like. He said he hoped it wouldn't come to that. I said I hoped so too and meant it, and also asked him to be ready. I walked to my car feeling, for the first time since landing, like someone moving forward rather than just reacting. I served the notice that afternoon formally as James had directed, with a copy delivered to the house and a copy sent by recorded post. I had not told Renata it was coming. I had considered whether to give her warning and decided against it, because warning her would have given her the opportunity to consult my mother, who would have called me, and I would have spent 3 days managing that conversation instead of moving forward. I knocked on my own front door, the green door, which I was already calculating the cost of repainting, and Renata answered it herself. She looked at the envelope for a moment before taking it. Then she looked at me. Her face did something complicated, not quite a surprise because I think she had known something was coming, but a kind of recalibration, as though she had been hoping for a different version of me to show up and was only now accepting that this version was the one she had. I said she had 28 days. I said Colin also had a copy addressed to him. I said if she needed help finding somewhere to go, I would help her look, but that the date was firm. She said very quietly, "Is this really necessary?" I said yes. I did not say it with anger. I said it the way you say something that is simply true, level and clear and with no particular emotion attached to it, because there was nothing left to be emotional about. The decision had been made, not in that moment, but in the months she had spent in my house without asking, in the flat she had given up without telling me, in the door she had repainted without a thought for whether I would mind. I turned and walked back down my front path. The 28 days were not quiet. My mother called for more times. I answered 3 of those calls and said the same things each time. The notice was legal, the date was firm, I was willing to help Renata find alternatives, and I was not willing to discuss whether I should have handled it differently. My Aunt Cecilia sent a long message calling me cold and saying that blood was blood, and that a house was just a house. I read it once, set my phone down and did not reply. My cousin Marcus, who had always been closer to Renata than to me, sent a message asking if we could talk. I said yes, and we did, and he was more thoughtful than I expected. He said he was not taking sides, but he wanted to understand what had happened. I told him. He was quiet for a while and then said, "She should have asked you." I said yes. He said, "Why didn't she?" And I said that was the question I had been sitting with my whole life. The one person who did not contact me was Colin. He had received his notice, and based on what Renata told me in a brief, strained conversation on the front step one afternoon, he had already started looking for a flat. He had, it turned out, not known the full story of how Renata came to be living in my house. He had believed the arrangement was agreed. When he understood that it was not, he was embarrassed enough to stop being part of the problem, which I respected without saying so. Some people, when confronted with what they have been part of, choose to exit cleanly. It was more than Renata had managed. I thought that said something about him. It was not nothing. On the 19th day, Renata came to the front door and asked if we could talk properly. I said yes, and we sat in the kitchen that still had the unfamiliar curtains and the moved coffee machine, and I made tea this time, which was my version of the same gesture she had made on the first evening. She had been doing things differently over the previous 2 weeks. She had not argued with the notice. She had not appealed to our mother again, or not in any way that reached me. She had been quiet in the house, quieter than she had probably been in years, and she had started, visibly, to sort and pack the belongings she had brought in. Colin's desk had been removed from my study. 3 boxes sat in the hallway. She sat across from me and did not reach for her tea right away. She said she wanted to say something she had not managed to say on the first night. I said I was listening. She said she had known, from the moment she moved in properly in April, that she was doing something she had not been given permission to do. She said she had told herself it would be temporary, and then she had told herself I would understand, and then she had stopped asking herself questions about it at all. She said that last part quietly, with the specific flatness of someone describing something that shames them. She said she had been doing a version of that her whole life, not asking herself the questions she already knew the answers to, because the answers required something from her. I sat with my tea. I said I knew. She looked up. I said, I know. I've known for a long time. What I said to Renata that afternoon was the most honest thing I had ever said to her in 30 years of being her sister. I said that I had spent most of our shared life in the position of the one who had enough and therefore the one who could afford to give some away. I said I had given time, money, space, patience, and that I had told myself this was what it meant to be a family, what it meant to love someone who needed more than I did. I said I had renovated my house alone, saving every receipt, skipping things I wanted so that the work could be done properly and the savings could recover, and that I had felt proud of that and proud of the house and what it represented. And I said that coming home to find it occupied and repainted and rearranged without my consent was not just a practical problem, it was a statement. That what I had built could be walked into and used without asking, because it had always been understood in our family that what I had was also available to Renata, and that my preferences were a secondary consideration to her needs. She was very still while I said all of this. She did not interrupt and she did not look away. When I finished, she said, "I treated your life like it was also mine to use." I said yes. She said, "That's what I've always done." I said I knew. She nodded slowly, the nod of someone who is not agreeing as a performance but registering something as true for the first time out loud. We sat for a while after that in something that was not comfortable but was honest, which I had decided was more valuable to me than comfort without honesty had ever been. She moved out on the 26th day, 2 days before the notice expired. Colin had already gone, had taken his things over a weekend 2 weeks earlier in a series of quiet, efficient trips that I had stayed out of the way for. Renata moved out in a single day, with the help of a van she had hired and our cousin Marcus, who drove it. I was home for part of it and away for part of it. I went to a coffee shop for 2 hours in the middle of the afternoon because I did not want to stand in my own hallway watching, and because I had learned that not every moment needed a witness. When I came back, the house was empty except for my things, which were still where they had been moved to, and Renata's key was on the kitchen counter. She had left it on the oak table, my table, next to a card. The card was a plain white envelope with my name on the front in her handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper, and on it she had written about half a page. She said she was sorry. She said she knew sorry was not enough. She said she had been looking at herself during these weeks in a way she had been avoiding for a long time, and that she did not like what she had seen. She said she was going to be staying with a friend while she found a flat, that she had a lead on something good, and that she was not going to ask anything from me while she figured it out. That last part was the one that hit me most, the deliberateness of not asking. It was the first time in our adult lives I could remember her saying she was not going to ask. I spent the first week back in my house alone, which was what I needed. I cleaned thoroughly, not because the house was dirty, but because cleaning is the way I move back into a space after something difficult has happened in it, the way I reclaim it room by room and make it mine again. I repainted the front door myself on a Saturday, starting early in the morning when the air was cold and still. I chose a color called Warmstone, which was close to the original cream but with a little more depth, something I had been thinking about changing to anyway. I sanded the existing paint back in sections, primed the bare wood, and applied 2 careful coats. A neighbor from 3 doors down walked past in the late morning and said it was looking beautiful. I said thank you. I meant it about more than the door. I rearranged the living room back to the configuration I had chosen. Sofa facing the window, bookshelves where I had always kept them, the light falling through at the angle I had thought about when I bought the furniture and imagined sitting in it on winter evenings. I moved my coffee machine back to the center of the counter and put it back where it belonged. I took the unfamiliar print off the wall and left the space blank for now, because I had not decided what to put there yet, and blank was better than wrong. I did not rush. I had been managing an 11-month project in another country, and I had not allowed myself to rush that either. Everything important took the time it took, and forcing it produced cracks that showed up later. I stood back at the end of it and looked at the room as a whole, and it was right again, mine again without question. The conversation with my mother happened 2 weeks after Renata had moved out. I had been the one to call. I had waited until I was ready, until I had finished reclaiming the house, until the door was repainted and the study was mine again and I had slept several full nights in my own bed and could approach the call from a place of steadiness rather than reaction. My mother answered on the second ring and said my name in the specific way that meant she had been waiting for the call and was nervous about it. I said I wanted to talk properly. She said yes. I told her what I had told Renata, all of it the same way in the same steady voice. I told her about the spare key email and what it had said. I told her about the photographs Delia had taken and the timeline they showed, I told her about the study, and the door, and the notice, and what Renata had said in the kitchen on the 19th day. I did not ask my mother to take a side. I told her that I needed her to understand, clearly and completely, what had happened. Not one side of it, the whole shape of it. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "I told her she should have asked you." I said I knew. Then she said, "I should have asked her more questions when she told me she was staying at your place." She said it slowly. The way she said things she was only arriving at as she spoke them. It was not an apology exactly, but it was more than I had expected from the call, which meant it was something. Renata texted me 6 weeks after moving out. Just a short message. She had found a flat, was signing the lease that week, wanted to let me know. I replied with one word, good. I meant it. Not warmly, not coldly, just accurately. It was good. It was the right shape for things. A week later she sent a longer message asking if we could meet for coffee sometime. Not to go over anything, just to see each other. I sat with that message for 2 days before I replied. I thought about what I wanted the relationship with my sister to look like going forward, which was a question I had never seriously asked myself before because I had always accepted whatever shape the relationship happened to be in, the way you accept the furniture arrangement in a room you were born into. I had rearranged my living room. I could think about rearranging this too. I replied and said yes, coffee the following Saturday. We met at a place near her new flat, neutral ground, no history in the walls. She looked tired and more real than she usually looked, less performed. We talked about ordinary things for most of it. Her new job she had started 2 months ago, a film I had seen in Lisbon, the fact that the oak trees on my street had gone fully gold. Near the end she said she had started seeing a therapist. She said it in a matter-of-fact way, not asking for a response, just saying it. I said that was good. She said she knew there was a lot to work through. I said I knew too. I thought as I walked to my car that careful and honest was not the same as warm, and that for now careful and honest was what I had to offer, and that it was enough. I went back to work the week after I returned, remote at first because my firm had managed the tail end of the Lisbon project in my absence for the final month, and there was a handover process to complete and documentation to finalize and a series of calls with the Portuguese team to close out properly. I was glad for the work. I had always been someone who thought more clearly when her hands were occupied with something real. The project had been the biggest of my career and it had gone well. The waterfront building had been brought back beautifully, structurally sound and historically faithful and alive in the way that only renovated old buildings can be alive, with the memory of their original form underneath everything new. My director sent a message saying the client had been exceptionally pleased, and that there was a conversation he wanted to have when I was settled. I knew what that conversation would be. I had been offered more responsibility before and had always weighed it carefully, factoring in everything, time, cost, what I would need to give up. This time I factored in something else too. The house, which was mine again, and the life inside it, which was also mine again, and the understanding I had arrived at across these difficult weeks that I was very good at looking after things that mattered, including myself. I had also been quietly rebuilding things that had nothing to do with the house, sleep, a routine, the particular kind of ease you feel in a space that asks nothing from you because it is simply yours. I thought about that ease often. I had not fully understood what I had until the weeks when it was gone, and I did not intend to take it for granted again. Delia came over for dinner on a Friday evening 3 weeks after I was home. She brought wine and asked for nothing in return except conversation, which was the kind of friendship I had valued for 20 years and valued more now. She wanted to know the whole story from the beginning, and I told her, from the text on the Lisbon balcony to the coffee with Renata to the repainted door, and what it had felt like to choose the new color. She listened the way she always did, completely, without filling the silence with her own reactions. When I finished she said, "I wasn't sure whether to text you. I kept thinking it wasn't my place." I said she had done the right thing. She said she knew how much the house meant to me. She had watched me renovate it, had helped me carry tiles one Saturday when I had run out of hands, had been the first person I had brought a glass of wine to on the new front porch when it was finally done. She said, "It looked wrong with the green door. Every time I walked past I thought, that's not Natalia's door." I laughed. It was the first proper laugh I had had since landing, and it came from somewhere real, the way laughs do when something is both terrible and entirely recognizable. I said she was right. She said the new color was exactly right. I said I knew. We finished the bottle of wine and she stayed until almost midnight, and when she left I stood on the front porch, the porch I had built with the chairs I had chosen, and I watched her walk down the street, and I felt very clearly that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, in a house that was completely and entirely mine. My firm offered me a new project in early December. It was a large commission, a mixed-use development on the edge of the city, the kind of project that would keep me close to home for at least 2 years. I accepted it. I also had, in the same week, a call with a legal contact James Okoro had connected me with, about the formal record of the property dispute, which had been documented and filed correctly throughout. Nothing further had been required. Renata and Colin had vacated within the notice period and there had been no need for further legal steps. But James had advised keeping the record clean and complete, which I had done. I had a file. It was organized, time-stamped, and thorough, in the same way that the email I had sent to Renata before I left for Portugal had been organized and time-stamped and thorough. I had learned in 15 years of professional life that documentation was not a gesture of distrust. It was a gesture of clarity, a way of making sure that what was real stayed real, that the shape of things was not dependent on memory or goodwill or whoever was telling the story most persuasively in any given room. My grandmother had told me once when I was very young, that the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to know what is yours. I had thought she meant possessions. I understood now she had meant something broader. She had meant, know what belongs to you, and do not let it be confused with what belongs to someone else, no matter how the confusion is framed or who is doing the framing. I thought about that a great deal while I sorted the file that afternoon, in the quiet of my study, at the drafting table that was back where it belonged. I sit on my front porch most mornings now when the weather allows it. The oak trees are bare in winter and I can see further down the street than I could in autumn, all the way to the corner where the streetlight comes on at dusk. The door behind me is warm stone, which is the right color for this house, and I know that because I chose it and I know this house better than anyone. I have been thinking about what the past year has taught me, not the Lisbon year though that taught me plenty, but the week since I came home, since I stood in my own hallway with my bags at my feet and heard voices in the kitchen. I have thought about how long I accepted that what I had was less protected than other people's things, because it had always been understood that I could manage, that I was stable, that I had enough. I had enough. I do have enough. But enough is not the same as unlimited, and capable is not the same as available, and love, the real durable kind, is not the same as a resource that can be drawn on without acknowledgement or return. My sister and I are in the early stages of something that might eventually become a different kind of relationship, if we are both careful and honest and willing. I am willing with clear eyes and without guarantees. The house is mine. The door is the right color. The coffee machine is in the center of the counter where it belongs. And I am home in a way that goes deeper than address, home in the way you are when you have looked clearly at what is yours, protected it when you had to, and understood finally what it was worth.